So as we go through the first section, each set of questions, there are 3. The party in the first group has 3 minutes to respond to those questions that have been provided, and you'll see those up on the screen scrolling as we go through. So we might start off with Labor answering the first 3 questions. And those questions are: how would your party balance the needs for natural environment with the population increase in the Macarthur area? Given the predicted population growth in the region and the threat to security of water supply with intensive underground coal mining in the metropolitan catchment, what would be your party's position on that? And then the third question is: how does your party value national parks and reserves, and would you like to see the reverse to the decline in National Parks and Wildlife Service funding? Now, each of the parties with candidates in more than one electorate have taken a slightly different approach in how they will respond it. Some of the questions will be answered by individual people, and some parties will answer the questions all 3 together. So it's partly my job to herd the cats and make sure that that all happens properly. And we'll also be hearing from each of the independents related to that position that they have on those 3 major questions, given that they may play a role in a future balanced government. Okay, so if I could ask Labor to start with the responses.
Okay, so Labor have decided to divvy this up, and I've got the first question. And what I'm going to be talking about this evening is overdevelopment. Now, one of the main things that we're looking into is that we have real concerns that the Department of Environment is situated within the Department of Planning. And so environment just seems to be a speed hump on the way to things being signed off. Now, we have the most unbelievable development going on in our 3 electorates, and it's time for us to, we are looking very, very seriously at how we can extract the Department of Environment out of planning so that it's its own robust department. So it has the capacity to actually formulate change within the Department of Planning. They actually have to talk to each other. We intend to send this Greater Sydney Commission back to the drawing board. We don't agree with the way that that has planned our area and the assumptions that go with that. So we're going to tell them the premise of what you've planned is not what we're after, and we want you to go back to that. And we're looking at regulating LEPs to allow them to have more power and to then be able to be answerable to their local communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Sal. I've got the second question, and I will address the one in bold, because I think that's the most important part that people want to know, which is, of course, given the predicted population growth and in relation to the extensive underground coal mining in the metropolitan catchment. So Michael Daly has been very clear, as well as Adam Searle, that we don't see the future power supply for the state under the current market in the current environment being in coal. Now, we need to re-establish the government's position in terms of energy supply, look at renewables, look at those innovative ways, and make sure that we have government policy that's consistent with community expectations, but also consistent with market demand. Now, I do want to talk about the underground mining. So our specific position in relation to all the issues associated with underground coal mining, particularly around the ones that we have around to the south of the region. We are waiting until the chief scientist finalises that report, and we will be taking the recommendations of the chief scientist. That said, we have called for and have a sustained position that there be no more approvals until that chief scientist report is laid down. That's when we will know specifically as to what issues do exist there and how they are best addressed and how we can resolve them. From the broader perspective of water, is that it? Yep, sorry, no warning, no. Sorry about that.
And I have the third question, which is on the NPWS. There can be no doubt that the Labor Party has been the main protector of our national parks and wildlife habitat. The NPWS was created by Labor in 1967. The current government has cut more than $100 million in funding and last year cut staff by a quarter. By comparison, Labor added more than 3 million hectares of land to national parks in our last term of office. This government has added just 75,000 hectares, about 2% of what Labor did. They've virtually stopped creating national parks. Labor will support and enhance the treasured national parks estate of New South Wales with commitments to creating a koala national park in southwest Sydney, creating a Great Koala National Park in northern New South Wales to save significant koala populations, protecting the Kosciuszko National Park by repealing the Barilaro Wild Horse Heritage Act, and more.
Thank you. So next we have Heather Edwards from the Animal Justice Party, and Heather, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so basically the Animal Justice Party has 3 key areas that they look after: animals, humans and the environment. And then we have what we call the Kern principle that we apply to things when it's not in a specific area. So that means kindness, equality, rationality and non-violence. So as far as the overdevelopment is concerned, what we need to do is stop, reset the planning and redesign, and keep this in mind with our animals and our environment. So that means wildlife corridors running through the area. It also means that it's a good environment for both people to live in and the animals. Okay. As far as the water supply is concerned, now we wouldn't support coal mines because that is going to start putting things at risk. So no new coal mines, that's what we're saying there. Because if the water table gets poisoned, then also you're putting the risk the humans and the animals there. Very quickly, the funding for national parks and wildlife, it's been deteriorating. We obviously need to do something about that and increase it.
Thank you. Next we'll have James Jett from the Christian Democrats. James, you also have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Is that for all 3 questions?
Yes.
Sure. In terms of population growth, we have exceeded our planned population growth by several years. And our population growth has been steadily speeding up. So to plan properly for a population growth is difficult when you don't have a consistent population growth. In broad terms, I would recommend the planning of green spaces, open green spaces like sports fields and walkways and wildlife corridors, and have the building go around that. In terms of how we are to build, I think building up would be the answer. And that would put incredible stress on our water sources and our water ability. And so the Bradfield scheme of irrigation would be a way to do that. And that's a federal answer rather than a state. In terms of the koala bears, there are 2 suggested forms of recreational parks, one by the Labor, one by the Liberal, and I don't see any reason why both cannot be implemented. And as for funding for the State Parks and Wildlife Service, I think it would be a disservice to continue a decline in that.
Thank you, James. Next we have the Greens. And how would you like to answer that?
I'll answer.
Great, you have 3 minutes, thank you.
Yeah, that's loud. Okay. The Greens aim to achieve genuinely sustainable communities, and we want to do that by encouraging renewable energy, food production within that environment, waste reduction and heat sink reduction. But what we really need to look at now is the residential subdivisions where they walk in and just blanketly bulldoze an area and flatten it out, and then they subdivide and sell it off. What really could happen is that we leave it standing, you subdivide your lots, you map it out, and you don't remove any of the trees, so that then whoever buys that lot works with their builder and the council to work out which trees stay and which don't. Because we haven't got a tree canopy at all, we've got barely any remnant bushland to speak of. And so we really need to work with the natural landforms that exist on the Cumberland Plains, and they're relatively gentle slopes, and any builder worth their salt should be able to manage something like that. And that's all needs to be managed well so that we don't affect the topsoil as well as the natural environment that we've got around there. Now the Greens, we oppose any and all mining anywhere near water catchment. That's we don't agree with any coal mining being increased in the area, but I think we have to look at water as being a finite resource, and that's something that the average Aussie uses 340 litres per day, and only 1/100th of 1% of the Earth's water is actually available to humans. So that's something that we have to consider as being vital to our future, and we have to look at that, and that's before we've even gone on to discuss Warragamba Dam and the raising of that, and the effect on water long term with the second airport. In terms of funding for national parks, and I think that's been the very foundation of the Greens, is our view towards wild wilderness and wild rivers, and we certainly would seek to increase the funding that's been dropped in accordance with the inflation since that funding was stopped. And we certainly look at the significance of forests in affecting the water quality and the soil quality in those areas, and that's really important to the future air quality, particularly when we take into account the second airport, and in our area I think that air quality could very well decline.
Aaron. Next I'll ask Andrew Simpson, Independent, and Andrew, you've got 3 minutes for all 3 questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Just in response to the overdevelopment, Camden, depending on what figures you look at, it's either the fastest growing LGA, the council area, the LGA in Australia, or will be. We are currently looking at a population of just over 100,000 for 2019 as a proposed population on forecast, moving to 233,000 people in 2036. That's over 100% increase in people. I support Labor's call to remove the GSC from what is now into the Premier's department, as opposed to where it possibly should be going back into Department of Planning. However, I would strongly propose that it become a truly independent body other than a quasi-political movement. I would also strongly suggest to remove the metropolitan naming from the metropolitan rural area that has been assigned to any land outside the growth areas at the moment. It's a very vague term. The councils are struggling with what the metropolitan rural area actually is and what it allows for in terms of development proposals. I support a holistic environmental point of view, such as a balance between peri-urban, villages and national parks in the current MRA zone to stop the metropolitan sprawl. I also support, just quickly, somewhat of a best practice concept in planning. At the moment, we've got developer-led activity as opposed to best practice town planning from local and state government. In response to the water supply, as somewhat of an environmental layman myself, I would think it's somewhat sensible to not have any sort of mining within a catchment area or even adjacent to a catchment area. We should also recognise that coal is not the future, and we're moving away from a coal-based energy supply for long-term sourcing of energy for not just us but for the entire planet, and a strong push towards renewables should be seen. As Joanne alluded to, the New South Wales government has been accused by Labor of launching the single biggest attack on the National Parks and Wildlife Service since it was set up half a century ago. Penny Sharp, the Labor environmental spokesman and Shadow Minister, used the New South Wales estimates hearing to press the government to confirm the loss of 49 park rangers, or 20% of the total ranger staff, since the coalition came into office in 2011. As a quick aside, there's certainly plenty of funding available, and we should look at the funding that's been allocated to the biodiversity credits as opposed to what's been available and stripped out of the national parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. As a good independent, sliding something a little extra in there. So to bring on the next independent, ask Judith Hannon to speak to all three questions. You have 3 minutes. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, and welcome everybody for this evening. Overdevelopment. Well, if I go into the planning department one more time and hear it has to be affordable for developers, I will scream. Because literally this is how overdevelopment is happening in this area. We're given a specific number of houses to deliver, and that means nothing. When another developer arrives with another plan, all of a sudden the grey roofs start to appear. So overdevelopment needs to be come with infrastructure, and it also needs to come with environmental protection. Things are being signed off on Friday afternoons without the appropriate environmental heritage sign-off or anything else. And interestingly enough, the Department of Planning and Office of Environment and Heritage are now being rehoused in a developer's building in Parramatta. With water supply, stepping back, overdevelopment's giving us increased heat, as we all know, and increased domestic violence by 40% in some areas. Water supply. Without water, where will any of us be? And literally, if you go out to the dams that are supplying most of the Wollondilly, at this point in time, they're metres and metres below, and they have islands in the dam. So, until such time as we sort this out, and I believe you shouldn't just go in and meet with the Department of Planning, but you should have planning, transport, education, health, environment, all in the one room that puts a map out and says, these are the resources we've got, this is where it needs to be, and until you can meet the appropriate water supply and all the other infrastructure, nothing else happens. As far as funding of the national parks, well, I've walked in some of the areas that we should be having national parks. We've just been delivered a new national park in Goulburn, on the border of Wollondilly, to shift our koalas to. There's no koala trees at the moment, and the koalas haven't had a taxi ride there yet. And not only that, but the land and the family farm that was bought for an undisclosed amount came from a developer at Wilton. So I just think at this particular point in time, this is a turning point for this election. If we vote or allow our friends and relatives and neighbours to vote the same way, we will get more of the same, and we will not have much left to rescue. If we don't have water, if we don't get the national parks, where are we going to go? It'll be just that grey roof disease coming over the top of all of us. We have to be really brave, get out there and support everyone and get a change for the better.
Thank you, Judith. And now just to finish off the last response to this first set of 3 questions. One Nation, you'll be covering all 3?
Yes.
You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name's Charlie Fenton. I'm the One Nation candidate for the state seat of Wollondilly. Unfortunately, I just got the questions. Due to the fact of where I live, I don't have internet service, so it's a bit of an issue. But in saying that, overdevelopment in our area, all our little villages, the Wollondilly is made up of villages, we're having this problem where developers come along and they'll push it to the nth degree. And we noticed this at Thirlmere a couple of weeks ago. We were down there, and there's Carlton Road, and there's a developer who wants to put an enormous amount of apartments, 7 apartments on a 2,000 square metre block. And you've got people and families living across the road and up and down the street. There's no infrastructure there, and as Judy rightly said, if you're going to have developers come or developments in your villages, there's got to be infrastructure. And rightly so also, the water situation, I mean, how can you expect to have more people move to your area and not have water or infrastructure. This is a major, major problem. In relation to the national parks, we've got Natai National Park, which sort of goes down one side of Wollondilly electorate, and that's 120,000 hectares. In New South Wales, we have over 7 million hectares of national parks, which is all very well and good. But unfortunately, we can't use them. And I believe we should be able to get people in there. I totally understand that the National Parks and Wildlife don't have the resources or the money. We need to have more people out there being able to service these beautiful parks, and so the rest of the community can go and use them and utilise them as well, and establish some funding and get those places up and running so we can enjoy them, you know, whether we have horse tracks, walking tracks, or whatever be the case. At the moment, I've got a property at High Range and I'm back onto Natai. I got lost there 2 years ago on a horse. My mate and myself and I went for a horse ride and literally got lost and didn't know where we were. Due to the fact they're not maintained because of that fact. We haven't got the resources or the people and manpower to be able to maintain them. So I'm certainly in favour of national parks and the utilisation of them, which would be absolutely fantastic for our area. Overdevelopment, it's got to be capped, and simply the responsibility should be given back to local councils as opposed to having some bureaucrat in Sydney saying yes and no, it's not good enough, and please vote One Nation. Thank you.
Thank you for that extra bit, Charlie. So that ends the first section. The party answer the question. The questions are posed to particular candidates, and in some cases they're posed to all candidates, but I might take some leeway and maybe not get everybody to answer a question to all of the candidates. So to start with, sadly, just because it happened to turn out this way, this question is to all of the candidates. And given that we want to be succinct about the answer to the question, so there will be 1 minute, and at the end of a minute the bell will ring and time is done. And for these questions for all candidates, we'll mix it up a little bit. You're going to have to leave that in my hands, I'm sorry. This question's from Sue Gay regarding water conservation. How are the water authorities going to guarantee water security for the Macarthur region right now, let alone in the future, with massive population increase expected? With the spot land developments occurring across 3 shires, let alone the impact of the Greater Macarthur 2040 plan. So I'm actually just searching through this for the question, because there's a lot of background information. And I've got to say, I can't actually find a question in here, so I'll just leave that open given the introduction that I've given. There isn't particularly a question here, so if there's a brief comment.
Yeah, if I may, I think Sue, where are you, Sue? Yeah, I think ultimately what you're asking, how are we going to provide water security for the future in light of the pending development to drift beyond 500,000 and Cataract Cordo and everything like that. Long story short, it is a major issue. The problem we have at the moment, I think, I'll answer in 2 parts if I may, and it'll be very quick. The issue we have at the moment is because of Cataract Dam now being down, I think it is at 25.3% today. May last year, it was around 80% or something like that. Is it Tarrawonga down south? Yeah, that one. It's empty. And we've also obviously got Cordo Dam. The reason they're in that position is because there were no steps of water security put in place at a time when there needed to be. We've seen urban population growth suck the life out of our rivers and our dams. And to provide security going into the future, we ultimately need to convene a forum and get the experts at the table, the scientists, the conservationists, and work out how we do it. It is a very important question. It's probably one of the most important questions that get overlooked. But ultimately, we need to get the experts at the table and get them to put a plan together to work it out.
Is there anyone else that would like to answer that question related to water security?
I don't know why there isn't more water restrictions on, given the kind of country we've got and the climate change that's happening at the moment. Also, water tanks. Years ago, I wrote to Sydney Water before they did the desal plant and asked them why aren't they, you know, spending that money giving everybody water tanks. I mean, it's a little bit of a no-brainer. Anyway, that's mine.
Thank you. And I think the last one on this question, James, you put your hand up.
In short, what we need is an integrated water supply system. What we have at the moment is an integrated electrical system where we can put power from Queensland and New South Wales, from Tasmania into Victoria, from South Australia into Victoria. And we should be able to do the same with water. And it's a very simple thing, an integrated water supply system.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question now. The next question is for the Wollondilly candidates. It's from David Hunt from the Friends of Thirlmere Lakes. It's accepted, supported by a recent scientific report on mining damage and pollution in the Red Bank Creek, that pumping in longwalls under Tarmore and Thirlmere has dewatered the aquifers, drained the local creeks by lowering the water table and removed the once healthy ecosystems in those creeks. So in Wollondilly, if you are the future member, what will be your approach to break the impasse evident with the issue and require that the mining company to accept its responsibility to ensure the water table is allowed to recover under the Thirlmere Lakes National Park?
What's wrong with orange sludge in your creeks, one would ask, because that's what we've got at the moment. The mining companies often do, they tell you, oh, it's okay, it's acceptable, that was within the limits that we predicted. And that's not good enough anymore, because they say we will do this much damage, and if that much damage happens, then that's good. Well, it's not good anymore. Obviously, Thirlmere Lakes is a really, really sad situation at the moment. We need whole-of-life insurance from those mining companies, and if I'm elected, I will be bringing not only the experts we've got at the moment, because there's lots of people working on it at this particular point in time, but others together to see what we can do about keeping them back from there and how we can address the aquifer problem at this particular moment.
Well, I totally agree with Judy, as I mentioned before in relation to the Tarmore mine. And we've got the mermaid pools out there, which are absolutely beautiful in the lakes area. Well, there isn't any water out there anymore, and it's due to the fact that I think there's something like 26 kilometres of tunnels underneath that whole area, and they want to extend it more. So if I'm elected, I'd certainly want to get the experts in there to have a look, measure, and tell us exactly what's going on, and it's not just about ripping the coal out of the ground, selling it overseas, and the coal mine being owned by an overseas owner. That's not good enough, because we'll look after our environment, look after our water, and that's what it's all about in our area. It's extremely important. That's where I stand. One nation.
Thank you. Thirlmere Lakes is really, it is part of the World Heritage area, and it is absolutely disgraceful that it's been allowed to get to this situation. I believe we need to have again a round table on this urgent issue. We need to get some advice from the chief scientist, and we need to get environmentalists together, get everyone together that possibly can, to see what we can do to retrieve this beautiful heritage.
I think we need to get an environmental roundtable happening with both the mining company and government officials. We also need to do a thorough investigation, and we need to spend some money and find out what the solution is to this, and look for the mining company to pay for that at the end of the day, because they're the ones that have ruined this for everybody, and I think we really need to have this fixed as soon as possible.
I'd just like to kind of reiterate what the Greens policy in regards to this is. We oppose any and all mining underwater catchments. So particularly the special areas in the catchment. I think it should be a no-brainer, and unfortunately it's not, unfortunately. This includes coal and mineral mining, as well as conventional and unconventional, which is basically CSG, fracking. Parts of Wollondilly have fracking. And it doesn't affect, and like longwall mining, it's part of your water source. If the fracking affects the basin, artesian basin, then we all suffer. It's not one community that suffers, and it's the same with Thelmere Lakes. It's affecting water supply of a huge area, not just the local area. So I think that we need to be very frank what we have to do. And that's not discounting that these people have jobs in these areas and need to be retrained and put into different areas, possibly, new energy, like renewable energy sources, and companies that can do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is to the candidates for the Campbelltown electorate from Margaret Rolfe. Relates to effluent and sewerage. The sewerage outflows have increased at Glenfield in the Georges River. Will the sewage treatment works be upgraded at Glenfield? I have photos of blue-green algae and weed infestation.
Glenfield's in the state seat of Macquarie Fields, but that said, that is, I don't know where you are, but I'd like to know more about that so I could talk to my colleague Anna Chanthabong. Certainly I wasn't aware of what you just asked then, so that's certainly something I want to hear more about. Yep, absolutely, and I'll take that and I'll have a chat to Analac and we'll be in touch with you. Thanks for letting us know.
James?
I'm unfamiliar with what you're actually discussing here, but my initial thought would be to treat the effluent in such a way as that when it goes into the river system, it is drinkable. And I'm assuming at the moment that's not happening. But that would be my blanket, you could call it answer, without knowing the specifics of the situation.
Thanks, James. Next question from Jenny Wiles regarding transparency in consultants' reports. At present, when a developer prepares a DA, they pay their own chosen consultant to write reports supporting the development. This also applies to mining companies wanting to expand and can result in biased reports in favour of the development. In order to achieve more transparency, this process needs to be at arm's length from the proponent. A list of accredited consultants could be drawn up and managed by a government agency. Payment for services would be to the agency, not to the consultants directly. Would you be prepared to advocate for such a scheme if elected? And I'm happy to take the first 4 interested responses.
Right, sorry. So just going back to, again, what I was saying about best practice in planning, I actually believe that we already have that in existence in terms of consultants on a somewhat merry-go-round. So the same consultants that are being used by government and government agencies are being used by developers, are being used by proponents to essentially get what they want. It just depends on the project. There'll be one project that suggests one particular consultant says this, then that consultant's involved in another project for another government agency. What we need to do is actually bring it back to a best practice in-house, in government, with the Department of Planning actually having the final say and the actual resources to control the process in the first place and not outsource everything, which would therefore reduce costs dramatically. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be very cautious to have a body of people put together by government for that sole purpose of consultancy. What I would like to see is local councils held more accountable. I think they need to be empowered more. They've had a lot of powers taken away. I think we can empower them through the LEP, give them the teeth to manage that, put the laws in place, but at the same time make these councils accountable. You all too often see local councils and local councillors taking positions on matters for popularity reasons or whatever particular reason they may have. If we empower these councils, put the regulations into their LEP, but then make them responsible for them as well. I think that would add further transparency, but I'd be very cautious about having a sole body of people, consultants, appointed by government, and if that would actually provide any transparency or make further obstacles.
Judith, next.
I actually wouldn't have them appointed by government. I'd have all the consultants listed and literally like a ballot out of a hat. So you don't know what consultant you're going to have, and that would improve the transparency. Also, I'd like to work, there's an ethics, I can't remember what they call it, the New South Wales Ethics Committee in Sydney, and I'd be wanting to run through them the actual process that gets you a consultant, and you have no idea who that will be, and that will help a little bit.
Thank you. And last is Ben Casey.
Is this on? Yeah. Think about the Opal building in Homebush. They had their own quantity surveyors, they held their own building surveyors, they had their own people who ticked all the boxes to say that the Opal building was okay. What I'm trying to say here is there's self-corruption perpetrating all through these systems in New South Wales at the moment. You can't trust the people if they're not government appointed. You can't trust them because they're doing it for money. They're paid by the developer, they're paid by the builders to do exactly what the builder or the developer tells them to do. So, you know, this is all low resolution thinking. We have to get out of our boxes and say to the government, protect us please from these ravages that we're all suffering from. We're all suffering from it and nobody can stand up and do it. That's why you have to crack the nexus between Labor and Liberal and go to another third party. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is to all candidates, so I'm going to ask for 4 different people to answer this one. And it also relates to planning, so thank you Leanne Stewart for asking the question. The present New South Wales Government has taken away major development planning away from those who are representing community members, in particular elected council members. What are your thoughts or opinion on this decision? If elected, will you bring back planning decisions to elected community members on council?
Labor knows that the planning system is broken, and under a Labor government we will overhaul the planning department. We take the environment out of the planning department and we will give back more control to local government. What's happened here is the state environmental planning has a one-size-fits-all for the state. Now that can't work. What might happen in Sydney may not necessarily be the right fit for a development in Collovale. So we want to bring back some more control to local government into the LEPs, and we believe, and then involve the community as well, because currently at the moment what is happening is developments are being presented to the communities as a fait accompli, and it's a little bit of lip service that they're just consulting with the community.
Charlie, next, thank you.
Okay. It's a shame the Liberal candidate's not here because he used to work for Anthony Roberts in the planning department. He could answer this quite well, but that's probably the reason why he's not here. Anyway, in the Wollondilly electorate, we have the Wollondilly Shire Council, we have the Wingecarribee Shire Council, and the Wingecarribee operates on a different basis as to what the Wollondilly does. And I believe, and I've mentioned this several times before, you know, that the people of the community vote for the councillors to represent the community and do the best they can, which they do. And this has been taken away from the Wollondilly Council, whereby they have one representative on the board and they have a bureaucrat in Sydney, which Judy knows very well, that says, yes, well, okay, this is going to go ahead, and then you don't have a comeback from that. Whereas Wingecarribee, they have the councillors. I believe that the council should have the ownership of making those decisions without a question of a doubt, and give the ownership back. In saying that, I'd like to also say I'd like to see no developers as councillors on councils. I don't think that's good.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Next, David Powell.
One of the core Greens beliefs is in grassroots democracy. And I think when it comes to developments, this has been completely lost. There is absolutely no link between the community and the developments that go on in the community anymore. It used to be that you could go to the council and you would present to the council would let you know the developments, and hopefully you could convince them to act on your behalf. That has been completely removed from the circuit. So we have, no matter what you want as a community, no matter what development you think is appropriate, you really have no say in the matter. And that's unfortunately the way it is, and it needs to change. And as Greens really believe in, and one of the things I would try and do is reconnect with the community, give the community more of a say in all these developments, and give say back to councils along with the community, and get rid of these planning panels which are really only to help developers and not to help communities at all. And thank you.
Thank you, David. Heather?
I'd like to see the planning return to the councils, but I also want to make sure that there's no developers on council, and that way you can see a clearer picture in terms of transparency. And I think we need community consultation, and I think that's where you get it through the council. Up on Macquarie Street, they have no idea what's happening at a local level.
Thank you. No, we're going to move on to the next question.
Camden was noted and it's missing in that.
So the next question is from Margaret Moore regarding the proposed koala sanctuary parkway. It's to all candidates, so it's open to anyone who'd like to get involved in this one. Is the proposed parkway to be built? If so, when? If the koala sanctuary is to go ahead, how will this area be protected from surrounding scenic protection areas which are already being subject to land clearance, various commercial enterprises, overstocking, dogs, etc., all not very helpful to koalas? Who'd like to take that? Yeah, of course.
Very first thing you need to do is to look at the corridor you want to create, and then create a wall around it. I'm looking at one of those like soundproofing walls you see on the freeways, right around it. And what that will do is prevent any dogs, any predators from getting into it. And that will also keep out the diseased or the infected koalas. And what was the other part of the question?
No, I think you've dealt with it.
Okay. And
what would you do about the parkway? That's it.
In order for them to create pathways from one location to another where a road is involved, you would need to lift up that road by about 1 metre or so, allow them to go through. That means they can't go onto the road or into someone's backyard, and they have their own enclosed ecosystem.
Thank you. Karen?
In terms of koalas, I think one of those things that needs to be spoken about with the scientists and the people that understand koala habitats and how they function. In terms of fencing, it's not an appropriate structure for koalas because it creates habitat fragmentation, and these are animals that do like to roam a little bit, which is problematic with the chlamydia problem. But I think in terms of predators, we have to look at foxes as well as household dogs. So I think that's something that requires specialist input, and we have to look at the culverts under roads and the overhead bypass or the climbing nets. And there has been some success with both of those, that we didn't think that koalas would travel underground, but as long as there's a ledge where they don't get their feet wet, they do that. And so we've seen some of that footage, and that does seem to work well. But I think education in terms of dogs and how we treat urbanisation, because it does present a problem.
Thank you, Karen. And mentioning travelling koalas, I'd like to point out the good work that Pat and Barry Derman have done. You'll see a map over there of the movements of tracked koalas in the Campbelltown area to give you an idea of their home ground and range, how far they actually travel. So I'd like to move on to Heather now.
Animals is where we specialise. The Animal Justice Party really wants to see wildlife looked after. So what we would like to see is wildlife corridors. We would like to see wildlife protection from roads and developments and that sort of thing. So it's very important that we have these sanctuaries for wildlife. You can't keep going the way we are, and we need to protect the chlamydia-free koala population down and around Campbelltown, because that's an amazing feat, and we must protect it.
Thank you. And Greg, just to finish off.
Yeah, that's ultimately why we established our position on the Georges River National Park, but I just would like to agree, fences are quite prohibitive for koalas. They do need to move around a lot, and I think awareness and training people with their dogs, and in Campbelltown we're very fortunate to have a very active and very effective local community action group, Ricardo and Nia and those guys. But I think education is key. But we can't go putting fences around these very little things, because it creates a whole heap of other issues. So I think having the reserve in place and making sure that they have the capacity to do what they do in their natural habitat is so important. But people need to be accountable for their dogs and everything too. I've got a dog, and I like to bushwalk, and I wouldn't let her run around because it is in a sensitive area. So I think we need to take some personal accountability too, and that's very much about education.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And staying with you, Greg, this question's for both Greg and James in the Campbelltown electorate. It's from Syra Robertson. I hope I've pronounced your first name properly. And it's regarding scenic hills. Would you stop the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust from building a huge cemetery in the scenic hills of Campbelltown? One of the few green areas remaining. Greg, I'll take it back to you.
I've had a long-standing position against this development of the cemetery in the scenic hills. I believe it is a vital and important and an essential green buffer, green space area that divide the two local government areas of Camden and Campbelltown. This has been a disaster, and I believe it's a wedge that will see, I hope not to see, but I fear that it may see further development in and around the Greenick Hills. That matter is now, as I understand it, as we speak, before Gateway. To suggest I can stop it now, I would be misleading you so that I can, because I simply can't. It's the government that needed to stop this at a certain time, and they didn't do it. So in terms of accountability and transparency, you need to put that flat on the lap of the current government. Local Labor has had a consistent position against the development of the scenic hills and the cemetery in the scenic hills, and that won't be changing.
Thank you. James?
This particular issue is not one that I'm particularly familiar with, but in terms of generality, we do need cemeteries. It's a fact that people die. But like anything else, it needs to be planned properly, put in. It needs the right needs to be done in the right time, the right way, and in the right location. Now, I'm not sure whether that is the right location for it, or it's done in the right way. Perhaps the cemetery could be done in a way that is more environmentally sensitive, I'm not sure. But
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Anna Grassin. It regards conservation in the Macarthur area. Connecting remnant patches of habitat is important for native wildlife. Planting additional native flowering shrubs and trees are also important for human mental social health. Where in the Macarthur area would you see more habitat restoration occurring? And I'll take 3 answers.
I think we've undoubtedly discovered that, you know, along the bike track at Camden is ripe for fixing up, if we will, and making sure that we have the correct plants and the correct trail. Because if you follow the Nepean, there's actually a beautifully created little trail there along the banks of the river. And I agree. And it's a fantastic area to look after. Now, we had designated areas within Camden set aside as wildlife trails. And the only thing that's put them under threat was this current government's plans for a major roadway. So I would say that we need to keep the ones that we're looking at keeping and make sure they're protected.
Anyone else want to have a go at that?
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity in Campbelltown up behind Bradbury, around the old cattle dredge. We saw development as it was in those days, and Jeff McGill would know the estates as they were before they were developed in and around Bradbury. But they had planned to have trees and fauna as part of those developments, and I've door knocked all through Macarthur Heights and some of the new areas, and the trees just simply don't exist. And it's been filthy hot anyway, but I tell you what, I reckon it was like 5 degrees hotter in there because of the absence of trees. But I think we need to be planning it when we are looking at these new developments and making sure the appropriate level of fauna goes in to ensure that those communities have trees around them, because a lot of these suburbs are just simply cooking away, and we're really feeling it now with the heat. But I think it needs to be integrated better up and around Bradbury, up around the old cattle dredge. I think there's a lot of space there where some really exciting and special things could be done.
Any one more person to answer that question? Yeah. Oh, you've got it. No, one more.
I would reiterate what Sally said, that certainly Camden, if you were a kangaroo, you would struggle to hop 2 metres without running into bitumen or cement. And we do have, there's people who have captured kangaroos running down the main street, which is all sort of lovely, but it means that the urbanisation has actually given them nowhere to go. And I think it's when we are planting non-natives as a council, I think we're overdone with exotics. We need to look at the bushland and where it runs from and to, and at the moment it's along the bike track and then there's nothing. And there might be a tree down the road, but that's because Dad planted it because he wanted something pretty on the verge. So in the end, we've got nothing for our native animals to wander around, and we've had a lovely native pigeon in the past that is extinct to the Camden area. It has been spotted down in Wollondilly, but I'd love to have a go at getting animals that have been extinct to the area to come back.
Okay, so this next question is actually going to seem strangely self-serving, but it has been sent in advance, and I don't know whether they knew I'd be here asking it, and I didn't know that they would be sending it in. So this is to the Wollondilly candidates. The Stead Foundation established and has managed Wollondilly Sanctuary for over 50 years. The National Trust own the property and have not negotiated a lease for more than 6 years, and the matter has been with the New South Wales Attorney General for over 3 years of investigation. Will the candidate elected to the Wollondilly electorate lobby the Attorney General to intervene and have the National Trust stop trying to transfer the freehold land for their own profit? Judith?
This has been an ongoing issue that's caused a lot of problems for the people in the area and a lot of concern. I actually talked to the National Trust and asked them to mediate with the Stead Foundation. This area was put there specifically for the Wirrambirra that's there at this particular point in time, and they need to have some faith that going forward they'll have the land that they want. So I'll definitely be pushing, I won't even be pushing, I'll be going in and making an appointment and getting it sorted out.
Definitely, we'd like to see that Wirrambirra sanctuary there, and definitely we'd go and lobby the Attorney General on behalf of them.
Yeah, I will admit I'm not completely familiar with the sanctuary, but being a Green, this is all very, very important to us. and we would definitely go and lobby on behalf of it and find out what's going on and what the hold-up is.
Thank you, Dave.
I think I'll be very quick, and yes, I would definitely support the sanctuary.
Well, I'd certainly support it, and this is the problem we have with this government at the moment. They're just so complacent. They're just telling people what they're going to do. Judy mentioned, you know, she's been there and asked for mediation, and it hasn't been done. These people are doing the right thing and creating something, creating jobs, and creating an environment where you can go and look at the animals. I certainly will be ringing that guy if I'm fortunate enough to be voted in on the 23rd, the 24th, on the Monday. I'll certainly be lobbying for you, 100%.
Okay, so this is the last question that we have time for. There's many more questions, and if your question hasn't been asked, I do apologise. There's an opportunity to meet your candidate at the end of this to put those questions to them, and I'd also encourage you, if you're interested, go and meet with your candidates individually. There are 3 weeks to go before the election, and I'm sure they'll all be very pleased and happy to spend some time with you on those particular core issues that hopefully they might be able to sway you in their direction. But for tonight, this is the last question. From Bruce and Pam French. It is to all candidates, so I'll try and limit it to 4, but if someone's desperate to want to answer it, given it is the last, I'll allow a little bit of leeway on time. Do you have a plan to preserve and protect the Cumberland Plain woodland ecological community, listed as critically endangered in the Biodiversity Conservation Act? Much of this is on privately owned land within the Winnemata Shale Shelf area of Western Sydney. Current attitudes towards this unique resource through residential development and transport corridors, as well as the planned removal of 94 hectares at Western Sydney Airport, are resulting in relentless, ongoing destruction of this valuable resource, making extinction of the ecological community a real risk unless something is done to preserve it. Do you have a plan? And I'd be happy to take answers from anyone who'd like to deal with that. Greg.
Yes, definitely. This goes to the heart of the government's biodiversity laws. Their priorities are wrong. Ultimately, what this means is when you hear the word biodiversity, and I apologise to anyone who already knows exactly what they are, but when you have a portion of land that is to be developed, biodiversity means that you need to sustain the Cumberland Plain and other areas like that, but in this specific circumstance, that's the Cumberland Plain. Under this government's laws, what it means is you can provide that biodiversity in somewhere else. It could be a couple of 100 kilometres away or not in that specific region. We're going to abolish that. The biodiversity laws that we would introduce as a government would make sure that the biodiversity of lands like the Cumberland Plains, which is prevalent in our area, stays in the area that is being developed. That means within our region, in our city, within that zone, within that area. I think that goes to the very core of the point being made.
Thanks, Greg. Anyone else that would like to address that question? Heather.
I've seen some of the planned land clearing from Western Sydney right across to the Macarthur region and beyond, and the amount of land clearing that's planned for development is just frightening. I went to a presentation here that the Total Environment Centre put on, and it's scary, and I think we really have to start protecting our wildlife and our environment, and that's what the Animal Justice Party does. So we would get straight into action on something like this.
Still on? Thanks, Bruce. I've got 5 acres of the Cumberland Plain woodland on my property. I'm fully aware of what Camden Council in our scenario have tried to preserve. They're running a Save the Cobbitty Hills program right through Bruce's property as well. The literal fact is that once you try and replace credit, do whatever you want to somewhat negate the destruction of that environment, there's no bringing it back. There is no offsetting to somewhere else. I think as Greg somewhat alluded to, once you've knocked down the trees, once you've destroyed the habitat, once you've done with the environment, then it's done. There's no way of bringing back 100, 200-year-old trees. It's also opened up a particular case and opportunity for corporations to somewhat manipulate the scheme, to somewhat go out and purchase land for the absolute use of purchasing the land for biobanking credit and taking full monetary advantage of the situation. It's got nothing to do with the environment for them. They just go out, buy the land and sell it back to the highest bidder. Thank you.
Thanks. Karen?
Certainly, we need to look at the effect of the airport. That was mentioned as part of the question. And we need to look at the effects of planes dropping fuel and how that's going to affect trees and water in the area. But the Greens are certainly all about biodiversity preservation. And in 2015, in New South Wales, there was about 9% of the woodland that was considered to be in its natural state. That's a pretty low percentage. And in the 10 years prior to that, there had been stable clearing, but in the last few years, we've looked at the clearing of New South Wales land as really jumping with land development. And I think we're not looking at, people are not getting charged or even investigated when clearing private land, and it can be against what they're allowed to do. And so I think we need to give an incentive to people who have these important areas on their property. We need to provide an incentive to preserve that, and I think that really needs to be considered as a whole to New South Wales to stop that land clearing.
Okay. Thanks for that. Listen, I suppose the theme of what I'm trying to get across tonight is that you can't bank the policies of the Labor and the Liberal parties. Think about Hurlstone Agricultural High School. It was a jewel in the crown of the education system in Western Sydney, the jewel in the crown. The Labor Party was the one who wanted to destroy it. It was saved. Barry O'Farrell said he'd save it. Lo and behold, after Barry O'Farrell, they decided to sell it off for loose change. I think it's only $350 million. Another institution has gone down the drain. The Liberals and the Labor, they tell you and they give you false promises, and it all just slips away inch by inch, metre by metre, day or every other month. It all just goes. You have to get rid of the Labor and the Liberal parties to actually get representation and democracy back in the New South Wales. Thank you.
I'm going to follow that one up because I'm here and I've got the microphone. You were asked for a plan. That wasn't a plan. I've been out to the property that's in question. It's amazing. It's incredible. In fact, if it wasn't private land, I would suggest everyone goes there. It's so remarkable. Now, we've already stated that we have a plan to support the heritage listing, the heritage submission for Main Street of Camden. That includes the green space and the space all around it. Now, I would suggest that our second project would be starting to look at pinpointing the places of woodland significance and starting to protect those. And starting to look at putting in submissions to say we want these sections of our area protected so that they're protected forever. We have a history of doing that with national parks, and now we need to do it in little tiny ways. And I think that's my plan. That would be my plan, to start investigating that straight away. Thanks.
Any one last person to finish off? Judith.
It's all right. Wollondilly, all of your trees that have been cleared and all the rest of it have been sent to Orchard Hills. They're biobanking somewhere else. What will that mean for Wollondilly at the end of the day? It needs to be kept local. The plan is the biobanking system is not working. It needs to be reviewed, and we need to protect what we've got in Wollondilly right now.
I'd just like to give you a brief update. Technology is a wonderful thing. Facebook lets us know where Nathaniel is at the moment. So about an hour ago, he was down launching an initiative for the Bowral District's hospital and pleased to announce a certain amount of money that they're going to throw in that direction. It would seem opening a hospital or committing some funds to that is more important than responding to our 2-month-old request to come and talk to you. So on that note, I'd like everybody, if you just thank all of the candidates for giving up their time tonight. Their responses to the questions posed by the National Parks Association and your questions have helped clear up some of the matters for you that might make a difference for how you're going to vote in 3 weeks. As I said, you've got an opportunity between here and the door to further clarify or spend a little bit of time as they're out the door. Otherwise, please make sure that you follow up if you're interested in those particular areas. So just in closing, again, I'd like to thank West Leagues for giving us this venue at no cost as part of their contribution to the community. I'd also like to thank the committee who organised this, conceived the idea and spent months working to pull this together. In particular, Julie Shepherd, Bethany Robnici, Roland Laird, Paula Richardson, Kerry Timms, our timekeeper, Pat, and particularly Barry Derman, our multitasking cameraman and projectionist, and Tim Carroll. So thank you everyone for your time tonight, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Go and enjoy some food and beverages with Wests. Thank you.